The Marketing Mixtape, a space where we cut through the noise and focus on what matters in marketing. Grab your coffee and enjoy. Okay, so massive welcome to everyone. This is the first episode of the Marketing Mixtape, the podcast. Some of you may be familiar with our newsletter already. This is our first episode of the podcast format. I'm Bruce, speaking to you from the coziness of my studio here in Buenos Aires, and I am joined by my co-founder, Jason. How are you doing, Jason?
Thanks, Bruce. Yeah, I am also joining from the coziness of my little office at my home here in windy, and today it's quite wet in Bahia Blanca. So I'm about, 400 miles from your place? 450 miles?
Pretty much, yeah. Just a short plane flight away.
It's a little bit more than a stone's throw.
Bit further than a stone's throw, but no more than a short plane flight, so we're good. Okay, guys, so today we are going to be taking a look at some advanced settings, kind of going beyond the basic demographic targeting in essentially Google ad, YouTube ad campaigns. So right off the bat, Jason, what's your thoughts on kind of the standardized recommendations and kind of AI notifications or recommendations that Google push to people that maybe don't have manual campaigns set up and they're depending on Google to essentially run their campaigns for them?
Well, I mean, obviously, if you haven't got the time, just from the outset, if you haven't got the time to kind of learn the ins and outs of YouTube or Google, or even if you're on Meta, specifically about Google and YouTube, if you haven't got the time to learn the ins and outs of the campaigns. So, okay, if you're like obviously a small business owner or, an SME, CMO, or you're a marketing leader and you don't practically have the time to learn the ins and outs of YouTube and Google, don't consider it. This is a long journey, and I'd say the downside to the journey is that it's always changing. There's always change in the roadmap, and that's why I think some of the automations and some of the standard optimization tweaks you can do on just like smart bidding on Google, I think are great, because if you're just a small business looking for, you have very specific goals and how you want to get your business off the ground with Google, YouTube. I mean, obviously using their basic automation is definitely makes sense. Now, for a business that's looking wanting to grow their campaigns, and want to get more hands-on, understand what's going on, get more specific about the type of lead they want, the cost they're willing to pay for the lead, then that's when I think AI and automation is going to become complex, because the way AI and automation works is with a very fixed set of parameters. When the moment you move outside of that and you have multiple buyer profiles, different funnels, different landing pages, that's when things become a little bit more complex. And I would always, choose to either finding the right partner or finding a professional who can handle it.
Yeah, I guess it comes down to really understanding the why or the nuances behind the kind of those automatic rules and the recommendations that are pushed by Google. If we understand why they're being pushed to us and the mechanics behind those, I guess it'll be hard to make an informed decision as to whether they, make sense for our campaign. So would you say there's any industry maybe or size of budget spend where you'd say, hey, maybe automatic or AI does make sense?
Yeah, I mean, specifically when we're talking about AI, there's two big AI campaigns in Google at the moment. One is PMax, which is Perform Max, and the other one is Smart Campaigns, right? They're the two big AI, like the AI-driven campaigns. Then there are obviously prompts that Google gives you for other campaigns that are either built, using traditional methods. But specifically, industries that I think that can benefit from those. I've seen restaurants do very well because it's very specific, it's very local, it's very regional, and budgets. It could be anything between $500 and $2,000. If you're going to spend more than $2,000 a month, anything north of that, you probably have an extra $1,000 or $2,000 to invest in the right handling. It's probably going to set you up, for success long term. Restaurants do very well, like local hardware stores. If you've got a local furniture store or things like that, I've seen them do pretty well. And it kind of using the rule of like set and forget. Like I know people are probably going to hear it say like, what's this guy saying? But the reality is Google wants you to do that. And the platform is built around that. And, you know, if you want to take the platform and use it for something else, like getting leads at scale with, you know, millions of dollars on ad spend, it can be used for that as well, right? But the reality is it's really built for the small business to access a wider audience than probably their shop front. So I think smaller businesses, if you have a very local market, it's going to help. And probably a budget under $2,000 would.
Perfect. So I guess like if the basic targeting settings within Google are enough for what we want to do our campaign, then we could run with maybe an automatic campaign. So talk to me a bit more about you know, if we're looking at some advanced targeting techniques, how can marketers kind of move beyond basic demographics? Like what other targeting options do we have?
Yeah, I mean, the moment you get outside of like standard AI campaigns, being again, you know, perform max and smart campaigns, you start building campaigns from scratch. What Google calls expert mode, literally on the platform, they still call it expert mode. You know, we tend to use here in Yugo and in my like campaigns that I'm managing with the team, we tend to use like the Google Ads editor to build out campaigns because it just gives you the options in a format which is a lot easier to visualize and kind of deploy a lot of campaigns at scale, even if it's just 1 or 5 or 10. But when we use the Google Ads editor or Google Ads, like one of the things that we see in regards to targeting that I think is, you know, really essential for a business to understand is segmenting audiences. Like I think that's where everything starts. Now, recently, when Google removed contextual targeting, what they really did is they said, well, hey, if you want to create a campaign and the campaign's goal is to create conversions, drive conversions and not just drive impressions, for example, we can't fulfill your need of finding the right audiences based on a keyword. And this is specifically for YouTube and display. Now that was a big problem especially for us initially the first couple of days. It was like, well, how do we pivot from this? How do we move? But one of the things we learned in that, and I don't think we'd have learned it otherwise, is the power of audiences. And there's lots of ways you can build audiences. You might get to that later in this conversation, but if you know how to label your ICP, and when I mean label, I mean just be able to describe them practically, you're going to be able to build a really solid audience. And the more you know about your ideal customer profile, even such things as like interests, other websites they visit, obviously the age, like, you know, what is the gap? Like, are we talking about a 10-year or a 20-year age group? Like, what do those grouping or those labels look like? Because the more you know about that buyer profile, the less you're going to spend on refining your audience to find the right audience where you're going to get that sustainable acquisition cost or cost per lead. So I always say it's easier to actually start with a wider audience and refine down. You know, I used to always say this, like to clients, I say, hey, like the reality is if you want to get leads at scale, you have to create quite a specific, like, you know, you have a specific audience, but you create an audience by keywords or, you know, search terms, and then you basically refine it down to get your cost per lead down. What? By identifying keywords that weren't performing or placements that weren't performing, you start excluding them. But I realized over time that you can actually do it the other way around. You can start really specific, especially for smaller businesses, and then work out. So probably the first thing I would do is practically describe your buyer profile, your audience. That is going to help you immediately build out the audience in Google Ads with a lot more concrete information, and having validated it from either with your team or with your peers. I think that's going to help you. Then when you go to choose the audiences in Google, it's going to make things a lot easier.
Awesome. And for people that are running campaigns, I'd say pretty underused resource is the audience insights feature in Google Ads. So if your campaigns are currently running to a wide audience and you want to start drilling down into your ICP, who are your ads resonating with, you go to the audience insights feature and you're going to get some, you know, super interesting nuggets there as to the industries they're in, and that's going to help you to build out this ICP if you haven't done already. So you've talked about you know, ages, which is kind of, you know, obviously one of the demographics, geolocation. I think you talked about, you know, kind of local targeting locally, interests and behaviors as far as websites, related content people are viewing. Talk to me about intent. How can we target based on intent?
Well, yeah, since contextual targeting has changed, if your campaigns are focused on driving conversions, intent is really the best way to move past the kind of the initial roadblock of having limited contextual targeting. So, I mean, there are different ways we can measure intent, right? If we talk within Google Ads, when you're deploying campaigns, when you're managing campaigns, is one thing. And then another thing is to look at data in your CRM or on your landing page and, you know, different factors, and then be able to run split tests, changing the audiences and looking at certain sets of data and saying, well, hey, my bounce rate increased, my bounce rate decreased, you know, time on site increased, my conversion rate on the page decreased. And all of these can lead to assumptions and conclusions that can, you know, can help you identify if the audience you set out to target had the right intent. So there's kind of two conversations here: what you can manage before you run a campaign and what you can manage on the go and when a campaign's launched. So what you can manage before you run a campaign, as you're setting a campaign up, obviously Google now lets you build audiences based on multiple data points, right? So you can use keywords, you can use search terms, you can use websites they've visited, you can use existing conversion data. So one of the big things is if you have a website and let's say you have a domain, and on the domain you have lots of different funnels, right? The different stages in your buyer journey and different products or services. Now the conversion data that you have on your domain that is linked to your Google Ads account is a huge benefit for informing audiences and understanding and improving your intent, improving the audience intent. And one of the things you can do is you can, for example, use 3 factors or maybe 4 factors to build an audience. One of the ones I use generally is search terms, demographics, so age, and if you're targeting a specific gender or not. Conversion data, which is really, really important, because if you've already got conversion data on the domain, that immediately is going to help Google find that same or similar profile. And then the last is obviously specific interest. So there's I think there's 187 interest fields in the Google Ads audience. So it's huge. Like there's lots of interest, and then you can create, you know, multiple interests in an audience. And then what I do is I put that into an audience, I give that audience a label, and then I run a campaign to that audience, right? And the next thing I look at is after 30 days, I look at all the conversions, and Google will tell me which of the characteristics in the audience contributed to the conversion. And that's where you can start to, as you build out campaigns, you get smarter as to where your best conversion data is. And from my experience, it's conversion data. Previous historical data is just a gold mine. It gets better and better as you reap more and more of that data. And then the other side of this conversation is once that you have a conversion. Once you have a conversion, so you have a month of conversions, you can look at your conversions and you can say, okay, I'm going to change one thing in the campaign, and I'm going to then measure time on site, bounce rate, click-through rates, on-page conversion rate. And that also can help you identify and inform if your audience or your targeting is on point.
That's great. I think some super helpful tips there as far as leveraging conversion data to build out and find audiences similar to the ones that are already converting. Makes sense.